We are preparing to study, if you are in school, what would be called theology proper. And the reason it's called theology proper is because of the word theology. The word theos is the word for God. Anytime you see any of those words that have had like ology on the end of it, they're extensions of the word for word, like the words about God. Theology are words about God. Zoology is words about animals. Soteriology is words about salvation. That's where all those big words come from. The name explains what it is. And I'm not trying to get you to remember the names. I'm trying to just get you to understand what. So when you hear the word, you've at least heard it before. Now, to answer the question on how do I know there's the God, there are some philosophical considerations that are made. Most of these arguments are made from a philosophical point of view. We've already talked about the scriptural influences last week on how we know there's a God. What does Scripture say about God proper? So here are some questions that you would run through your mind. And these are what we're going to study tonight and probably the next time that I teach, whenever that is. Number one, here's the question. How could there be anything if there wasn't a cause to cause it that was uncaused? How could something exist without something making it exist? And that's a question. Everything that we know, we'll talk about that tonight, okay? Don't try to understand it now. These are the questions that people ask, the questions that I want to answer. Second question that I want to answer is how there could be a design in the world. The world is complicated, but specifically designed. It's amazingly how accurately it's designed. How could there be design if there was no designer? You don't have this in your notes. I just typed this in right while you're eating, right here in this place. So I'm trying to show you where this comes from, where the study comes from. The third question people ask, not necessarily in this order, and by the way, is the question, why would people recognize right or wrong if there wasn't somebody in the beginning to say what's right and wrong? Where did right or wrong come from? And the last question that people is where did people get the idea of a God anyway, if there wasn't one? What would make people think of a God? Each one of those are whole fields of study that are broken down into many different fragments depending on where you study and the person that's leading the study, actually. Because they're questions that can be answered in more than one way. I'm going to try to answer them in a way that can make sense to me. So, this is where your handout starts. The first, if I say argument, I'm not talking about arguing with someone. The word argument is to give an apologetic, and that doesn't mean to apologize for it, but to give a defense. That's what the word means. To give a defense in what you believe. So 2 Peter 3, which we studied the very first time, says, always be ready to give an apology, apologia, to give an apology for the reason for your hope. So what I'm trying to do is to give you reasons that you can explain on why you believe what you believe. Why do you think there's a God? Instead of just say, well, my mom always told me there was a God. Or I looked in the sky one day and I saw a rainbow and I knew man couldn't make that. There's got to be a God. Which, by the way, is an actual argument for the cause of God. So the first argument that I wanted you to consider is this. It's found within those questions, but not specifically as a question. That is the question. Man has an intellect and morals. He has a moral nature which demands God as his creator. In other words, where would man come up with morals if there wasn't someone to say, this is right and this is wrong? Now, where did that happen? Where did the beginning of that happen? Somebody tell me. In the garden. And what did God say? Well, that's the warning God said. But what did God say when he made animals? When he made the earth? When he made man? It is good. Listen, I don't know if you ever thought this through, but this is a really good sentence to hold on to as the beginning, like your diving board to jump off in. God didn't say it was good. That's when God created good. This is good. We look at bad and good and say that's good, that's bad. God wasn't determining good and bad because all he created was good. So God is the one who says good. Society, in its brashness, says, no, this is better. But there is no good, real good, outside of what God said is good. And if that's true, then it is God that developed morals. It is God that developed what's right and what's wrong. People, look at our society today. We are going down, not up. Man left alone does not get more godly. Man left alone in society, society does not get better. In fact, the only thing we get better at is doing good, badly. We invent our own good, and then we do it bad. We don't. The Lord. Do you remember the time? I can remember when I first came here. This ADD thought you had to let me get rid of it, or I'll never be able to do anything. When I first came here, everybody I knew never locked their door. And I'd be working on something, and one of the people out there, Texco, would say, "Well," I said, "I wish I had a welder." He said, "Well, why didn't you go in my barn and get mine?" We didn't do that where I grew up. We had bars on the windows where I grew up. You would get shot if you go in somebody's house. Around here, they just people, the doors were open. Nowadays, we're not anymore. So if we're getting so much better, then why do we have to lock our doors now? Why do people steal more out of stores now? If mankind could make himself better, why isn't it? And it's because we have hearts bent on evil. People who are lost are controlled by evil. But it is God who said, you see, humans have a sense of right and wrong. There's a moral compass and a moral code. You know, even where I grew up in the slums, there is honor among thieves. It was okay to steal from someone else on a different block, but you don't steal from anybody in your block. It was okay to damage property that belonged to a different gang, but you don't do that to your own gang. So where did that come from? See, that's the question. And the answer can't be man, and if it's not man, then who is it? And that's the deduction. If all society is based on right and wrong, where did we get the idea that it's okay to kill a cow and not a person? Now, I understand the argument. I'm not trying to say that's not true. But where did that thought come from? Where is it now that we define murder one way and we define it another way for different people? Every society has its own rules. Where I grew up, everybody stole. It wasn't wrong to steal. It was wrong to get caught. I didn't know anybody that didn't steal as a boy. I did not know. Even my mother and father stole. Yet, one day, I stole from the 5 and Dime a little blue rubber airplane. And I brought it home and I was playing with it on the floor, and my father saw me. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Georgie Keefe gave it to me." He said, "I hadn't seen Georgie Keefe around here. Where'd you get it?" I said, "I stole it." He beat me all the way 7 blocks to the 5 and Dime store on Passyunk Avenue and made me apologize to the man. Yet, as a teenager, when I worked for Capitol Records, I stole the whole box of diamond needles for him, for his store, and that's the only time he ever told me, "Good job." I grew up as confused as a termite in a yo-yo. I had no clue about right and wrong. Isn't it funny though? But he had his own standards of right or wrong. So, according to this argument, there couldn't be such a thing as morality without God. And the people who talk about the moral argument says that. If there is no God, then where does this come from? And that's where you leave the argument. Now, even Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, then everything's permissible. And look at our world going away from God. Those of you that are older, are more things permissible than they were when you were younger in society? Because we've cut God out of our moral system and now we're doing what people do. I've got more to say about that later. So, the moral argument continues like this. It seeks to exploit this fact. If moral facts are a kind of a command, like thou shalt not, or thou shalt, if that's true, then who commanded morality? Who said that? Who said you're not going to do that? That's wrong. Who said it's wrong for you to take someone else's property? And the answer to that question is, then we have to look at what moral is, what morals are, and then you start down that track to find out what morals are, and I think you'll find that the majority of morals in the civilized world come from this book. Not just in our country. We like to say we're the only country that started out godly. That's not true. Half of Europe or more started out godly. They just left it faster than we did. The same court that won't allow the Ten Commandments in it works on rules that are governed by the Ten Commandments. Cipher that sometime. So, the next argument we talk about is called the argument of cause, or the argument of first cause. That was the first question I gave you. If something's here, what caused it to be here? Now, the big word, the one you don't want to learn, is cosmological, and it comes from the word cosmos, K-O-S-M-O-S, even though it's not spelled with a K when you read cosmological. The word cosmos means to put in order. By the way, it's usually the word where it says, so God so loved the cosmos that he sent his only son. He's not talking about the planet, he's talking about the system. He loved the world. Ladies, when you buy cosmetics, it is to put in order that which is not. That's where the word comes from. I mean, that's the exact etymology of the word. And so the question then becomes, if there is an argument to be made about why is it happening, where does it come from? Now, this is the basic of it. You don't have this either. Just don't try to write this down. Just listen. Thomas Aquinas was a very, very famous and pretty smart man. He was a philosopher. They've made him a saint in some aspects. Saint Aquinas. He says there are five basic concepts that you have to think about when you think about trying to prove God. Number one, there's an argument based on motion. Things move. Everything that moves must have been started by something, so who started it moving? If there was a big bang, who pushed the button for the bang to bang? And what banged if there wasn't anything there? It's that kind of argument. The second argument is based on cause. What caused things to happen? We're going to spend some time on that tonight. The second one is possibility and necessity. If it's just random, why do things fit the way they do? If you, one man said, if you were walking along in a field and found a watch and you picked it up and it was working, would you assume that it built itself? And he uses that argument that where would you think the world comes from, who is certainly bigger than the world. That's the teleological argument, the argument from a designer. Intelligent design demands an intelligent designer. And then there's the argument based on the graduation of being. Why aren't all beings exactly alike? And if we all evolved, why didn't we all evolve at the same time? And if we did evolve, and some of you have been to the Creation Museum or you've studied it, why aren't there layers of sediment that have all stages of evolution in them instead of them being layered? Unless everything evolved on the same day at the same time. Why don't we think about things like that? And then the argument based on the purposefulness thing, that's the last one we're going to do if we get to it. Excuse me. So, let's do the argument on motion. Let's look about that. Here's the argument on motion. Number one, things in the world are clearly in motion. Do I have to defend that argument for you? Our world turns. Our world's turning within a world that turns, that's in a world that turns, that's in a world that turns, it's in a Milky Way that turns, in a planetary system that turns, and we don't even have any idea how big it is. When you get to the end of our system, you're at the beginning of what they think exists. It's all turning. It's turning at a measurable rate. A scientifically measurable rate. What made it turn in the first place? Whatever is put in motion must have been put in motion by something that created its own motion. You know, dominoes, when I first came to this part of the country, I was at Texaco Church, and I went to visit this man who, you might know him, his name was Olin Schluter. He was one of the deacons in the church. And he had all these trophies up on the wall. And I said, Olin, what are those trophies for? They look like dominoes. And he said, well, they are dominoes. I have trophies for winning in dominoes. Now, the only time I ever played with dominoes as a kid was you stand them up and you knock them down. And I said, you play dominoes? And when he said, we have teams. I said, really? Where do you do that? And he said, there's a place on Main Street called The Office. We go over there and play. All the men my age. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at grown men on the ground, crawling around, playing dominoes, rooting for one another, and somebody knocks the most down, gets the thing, takes it home, holds it on the thing. So I go home and tell my wife, Margaret, who was alive at that time, Margaret, you know, these people out here are crazy. They play these old men play dominoes. I never heard of 42 in my life. I knew they had dots, but I thought they were designs. So I go down there and I watch them and I see them, they're playing dominoes. It looks like pinochle with blocks of wood. I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed. But you know, if you stack all the dominoes up, somebody has to push down a domino. It will not push itself down. The first domino has to be caused to move by something outside of the domino sphere. This argument says, if the world is spinning, what caused it to spin? And if you'll say another world, and you might be right, what caused it to spin? And then you'll say, well, another world. And I said, okay, I'll play the game. What caused it to spin? And how far will you go before you realize you're going to have to come up with something that started something else to spin outside that system? That's the argument that's saying it's God. There's only one thing that could do that, a supernatural being who has the ability to create by himself. So, if that's true, if he's the first mover that put it into motion, then when you say to me, was God created, I know you don't understand this argument. If he was created, it would take a creator to create him. He is not created. He is. He is the outside force that has the ability to create everything else. And what he created was the beginnings of everything. Can you hear that? Now, I didn't say you're going to understand this. I'm just trying to teach you what you don't understand. I mean, because you understand these are philosophical arguments. But if it's not true, then what did? So here's what caused it. Here's the bottom line. Every effect has a cause. And the existence of our universe points back to a cause. Every person, I've even went back and looked at some of the greatest people who don't believe in God, they're atheists, and they're certainly evolutionary. Everyone says the universe didn't always exist. which means I have to ask them, well, then where did it come from? If it has to have a beginning, you see, even secular science agree that it has not always existed. So if it's not always existed, and we have to have a beginning, what began the beginning? That's this argument. The cosmological argument is what began it. And if you don't know, then you need to find it. So, syllogisms are philosophical ways of lining things up that are related but not connected to come to a conclusion. Here it is. Here's the major premise. Every major effect has a cause. Think of something that doesn't have a cause. And you can't. Everything has a cause. The minor premise is this. The world is an effect. Something made the world happen. If every effect has to have a cause and something made the world happen as an effect, then the therefore is the world has an adequate cause outside itself which produced it. The world couldn't possibly have produced itself. Period. That person is God. Now you may say to me, well, Joel, if you're having this conversation with somebody, and I have, what do you say when they say, I don't believe that? And I say, fine. What's your answer? I've got one. What is your answer? And where have I gone wrong? Explain to me how you can have something that there's no cause to. Just invented itself. Now that happens in Congress all the time. But I'm not talking about that stuff. So the next argument is the argument from design. Why is the world created the way it's created? The argument from design. Did I put these in a different order than you have them? I just realized that. Okay, I switched them backward. You are now on the bottom of page 2. Oh, yeah, the middle of page 2. I'm looking, I've got right here is where you are on page 2, under the moral argument. That's where you're going to start. I just realized I swapped them when I put that other slide in. So here's the big word that you don't have to remember. Teleological. It comes from the Greek word telos, or teleos, which means the end to which it was designed. I'm sorry I did that to you. Please forgive me. So you could also say teleos means the goal. What was the goal? Why did you do it? Not too long ago I was building something in the garage, and one of my family came out and they said, what are you building? I told them, and they said, why are you building it? I stopped. I couldn't tell them. So still there, partly built in my garage. It means, what could the purpose have been? And that was the question that I gave you in the beginning. Why would we have a world like we have it today? And so this is the argument for it. This is how you work through it. Number one, the earth has evidence of design. You cannot look at our world and think that it is random. You just cannot. You almost have to invent randomness. There's some kind of design that things go together. Whether you're talking about the oxygen producing process of plants to take care of beings that need oxygen at the right level. If we didn't have the right amount of nitrogen, we would die. If we didn't have the right amount of carbon dioxide, we would die. All those things are at the exact right levels. That's why people say, could we have life on another planet? Yes, we could, if it's just like this one. If not, it's not going to look like us, because we need what we have exactly the way we have it. Our Earth is tilted exactly at the right way so we could have the right temperature and we could exist. If it were tilted just 1 degree differently, we would have a different world. All of those things came from somewhere. I don't know that I can remember the exact number, but I'll tell you kind of like it. The mathematical chances of just our Earth, orbit, position, gravitational speed, weight, and length, all being the same by random, is 1 with 15 billion zeros behind it. Now that's where statisticians say, no sense counting anymore. Nobody knows. It's so random it can't happen. So what did that true? You see, the universe is a cosmos, not a chaos.
It's a chaos.
the way we're doing it now, it is, yeah. But I'm talking about the way it's created. And that's where part of this design comes. Some people call this the cosmological argument. They kind of overlap. So if order and complexity of nature and the universe point to the existence then of a great designer, how would you have design in complex cosmos without a complex designer? There's no place for that to happen. And here's a proof for you. Think of all the things that we've seen out there in the West Coast especially. Mudslides, rock slides, avalanche. When we lived in Colorado, they have an avalanche every once in a while. I lived in New England, in New Hampshire, and there was a quarry behind me, and every once in a while the rocks would fall down. Never once did I see those rocks fall down that hill and make a fence. Never once. They always made a pile. Never once did they come out in order. Now I realize that's silly and probably facetious. But that's almost as silly as you telling me that the earth created itself from a big bang and turned out like this. You see what I'm saying? The theological argument, when you put to people, there's no answer to it. How does it happen? Well, then there must be something that has it. So here's the syllogism that we were talking about. Number one, design presupposes an intelligent architect. Some of you build houses. All of you live in houses. Did it just design itself? The streets in a town are supposedly designed so the traffic runs better. Until we got around 21st Street, that worked. The minor premise says the world shows evidence of design in every part. So if the major part of the argument is there's a presupposition about design, then, and the world says, yes, there is evidence of a designer, then the therefore has to be the world was designed by an intelligent architect. That's the reasonable conclusion. So I know there's a God because of the design of the world. When you get in, I already gave you the Bible verses last week. That's why I gave them to you last week. When God created these things, He created them for us. He created the world for man, so that man could live, and then created man so he could live in the world that He created. He didn't have to grow extra stuff. He wasn't created with gills, and then God decided, oh no, I'll put them on land, and the gills had to go away. We have exactly what we need. That's how we're created. Now, your body may be like mine. I was born in a kingdom, and I turned it into a ghetto. I got that part. I'm trying to work on it. But the fact is, I'm still designed to do what God wants me to do. And so that is the end of that argument. That's the concept. Do you understand what I'm saying? So the first argument is, what's the cause? Where did morals come from? Now, after morals, what's the cause of the very first movement that happened? The third argument is, why did it come out the way it came out? The fourth argument here, and these are all the major ones, the big word is ontological. It comes from the word ontos. It means to think, to know that of a person. And so this is called an a priori argument. There are two. A priori is to think of something before it happened and try to reason it out. And a posteriori is to look at something after it happened and try to figure it out. So this is before it happened, looking at it this way. So here's the argument. The very fact that human beings have an idea that God exists points to the reality of existence. And the people would say this to the person. Where did the idea of God come from if it didn't come from God? What would make man think of that? I don't know that this is still true because I've been out of the study that I did on this for probably 8 or 9 years now. When I did my last study, they have never found one people group on earth that did not have a supreme being. Whether it be a pineapple, an airplane that fell out of the sky during the Second World War, and a gorilla, or whatever. I'm not talking about that's what a God. I'm talking about the concept of having someone that you pray to so your crops get better. Where did that concept come from if there is no God? See, our concept would be to work harder, to do better, to learn which brand of seed to plant next time. But where did the first concept come from? That's the concept here. Every human culture has some desire and some belief in a supreme being. Even people who don't believe in God believe in something. I've had people say, I know something's out there, I just don't know what it is. I just don't believe in God. So I said, well then, what is it? What is it? There are some groups, I can think of a fraternity group that they don't believe in the same God that I believe in the Bible. They just believe that there is a supreme being. It could be a 57 Chevy. And you make that your supreme being. But where does that idea come from if there is no God? And the idea is it's God who puts it in people's hearts. That's where it comes from. His desire to touch us. So if I did the syllogism on the ontological concept, or why did we know there's a God, here it is. Here's the major premise. An intuitive and universal belief among men must be true because we've never found somebody that didn't have one. If that's true, if men intuitively decide there's a God, where'd that thought come from? And yet everybody's got it. Every people group. It's not just folks who are in this particular group. It's not just poor. It's not just rich. It's not just civilized. It's everybody. Third world countries, first world countries, it really doesn't matter. Even to this day. The minor premise is this. If the belief is God is universal and intuitive among men, then there's only one thing that could cause that, and that is that the belief that there is a God is true. Those are the four major arguments when people say, is there a God? And they are not difficult. I mean, people, you can make them difficult if you want to and let the 50-cent words run you off, but you can have this conversation with somebody. Now, you're always going to come to the end and say, well, if I'm not right, what is right? But knowing this argument is going to take the teeth out of the argument they're going to bring to you, because what I'm teaching you is the answers to the question they're going to ask. Now let me say this, and I understand that we are on a time limit, and I'm trying desperately to hold it. But listen, I really didn't plan on this being a lecture. If you have a question, you need to ask it. Don't walk out there saying, I didn't get any of that. He's over my head. Because that's not true. Ask the question. I've never heard a dumb question with the exception of one in all the years I taught. And it was just undoubtedly a dumb question. They were trying to act smart, and they proved that they weren't. Other than that, I've never heard one. If you got the question, I may not have the answer. I'm pretty good now. I've learned to say, I don't know. On my Monday night Bible study, they tease me all the time. They say, that's just another thing Joel doesn't know. Doesn't bother me. I can learn. But I want you to ask the questions. Please don't go away saying, I just didn't get it. I should have said it at the beginning probably, yes, instead of 6 minutes beforehand. So, if all of that is true, then how does God tell you about himself? If those arguments are right, what does God do to tell you about that? Where do you get the information? And I believe it's called revelation. God reveals himself to us. In the Bible, the last book is called Revelation. We're talked about revelation kinds of material. It comes from the word apokalyptos, which means to reveal. God reveals himself. That's why it's called apocalyptic literature. So Revelation is essential to Christian theology Because you just need to read this. If you want it later, I'll give you the PowerPoints. You can have everything I've got. I'd rather you listen and get it than try to write it down, because there's a lot of words here. I'm just trying to help you with this thought. We'll go back over it again. If God reveals himself, why does he need to? And the answer is because you can't see it in nature. Nature reveals that there is a God, but not completely enough so you can understand what God does and who God is. Romans 1 says, there'll never be anybody that's ever walked the face of the earth that doesn't know there's a God, but I'm not sure they've heard the plan of salvation by looking at nature. They just know there's a God. So God reveals that, you see, and no matter, think when Christopher Columbus went to school, when he went to science class or geography, I don't think they have geography anymore in school, but when he went to geography and it says the world is flat, true or false on the test, the right answer would have been true. It wasn't truth, it was true, because that's what they thought. At one time in life they thought a turtle held up the earth. Another time they thought a man held the earth on his back. We sent somebody to space and we finally really saw that the world was round, or at least elliptical. Science has proven things that when I went to school I never heard of. They were thoughts. I can still remember in science class someone said, you can't see electrons, they're invisible. But if you put them in a vacuum situation with smoke, you could see their trail, because that's all we saw back then. And I saw that with my own eyes. But now they have electron microscopes. You can see them. But science still, no matter how much it's been developed, can still not answer the question without doubt. Where did origin start? What caused it? There are theories, but they can't answer it without thought. Where did life begin? The answer is some primordial ooze. Well, what caused the ooze to ooze? What caused? Well, it must have been a lightning bolt. Well, what caused the lightning bolt? Do you understand? It's regression. It's decision by regression. You go back far enough, you're going to come to a place where you can't answer it anymore. That's the arguments that you're trying to share with people. We do not know the total knowledge of the things we find. We're finding things every day in our life that we still can't explain. They're there. We can identify them, but we still don't know everything about them. And that's because God created them. We don't know the final destiny of things. Where do they go to at the end? Where's the final destiny of people is? And some people say, well, you just get in the ground and you die and the worms eat you. And then someone else say, no, you'll come back as a dog or a cat or something. And I said, is it before the worms or after the worms? We don't know. Science doesn't tell us. But this book tells us. You see, the universe is still a dark mystery. If you get out to the end of the universe, the Hubble telescope showed us that we didn't know anything about where we live. Man, it got out there and they found stars. There are more stars found at the Hubble telescope than they knew existed before it was built. And when you get out to the end of them, they think there are billions of galaxies like ours past that. Before, you used to say we live in the Milky Way and that's it. If you went to school when I went to school, that's what they taught you. We live in the Milky Way, we're one of the planets in the Milky Way, and that's it. Well, now we understand the Milky Way is a little drop, like your fingernail to your body, to what we can see. We're added, how many planets did they have when you went to school? Now they've added planets every day. So revelation is needed, secondly, because revelation is essential to Christianity, because sin distorts human reason. We are egocentric people without Christ. Many of us are egocentric with Christ. It's all about us. So we have a tendency to report and understand things at the level of our understanding what's going to be best for us. And so the truth comes, we get what's right and what's wrong, and when man decides what's right and what's wrong, it's always who is bettered. That's not what God did. He doesn't plan on things. Even Paul says this. God took the wisdom of the world and gave it to foolish men. Paul said God chose the foolishness of the cross, Colossians 1, to confound the wisdom of the world. You see, the thought without revelation is, why would someone want to die for your sins when all you have to do is be better? That's what the world will come up with, and still does. God says, they'll call you the fool. God says, let me show you where the foolishness is. I'm going to take this foolishness and confound the wise with the only way you can get to me is not through wisdom, but through foolishness. Oh, Jesus said it this way, unless you come to me like a child, you can't come to me. I mean, you can't reason your way to Jesus. You just believe him. You accept him. How did this work? Quickly. You've seen this sign, I think, a long time ago, but I can't imagine who was here. There is such thing in this world called truth. There is truth. I think this Bible is truth, the only real source of truth we have in life. Even true what's today is true, could be false tomorrow when we find out something else in the world. Well, how do I find my truth? That's my question, and my solution is this. All of us live with what I call a paradigm. I'm not the only one that calls it. That's the name of it. The paradigm is the window of your experience, your life that you look through that helps you make decisions. So, when a person wants to find the truth, the person looks through their paradigm at the truth, and what they wind up with is not the truth, but the perceived truth. What they think is the truth. That separates human thought from this. God doesn't have perceived truth in here. He has truth. Amen. So man can come up and look through their paradigm and say, well, it sounds right to me. And I want to say, well, who cares? Your paradigm could be weird. I mean, I grew up with a horrible paradigm, a slum paradigm. You wouldn't let me live in this part of the country because I don't fit your paradigm. Mainly because it was wrong. I had to change. So I went to God, and he built me a new paradigm. I'm trying to see things through this book. The perfect illustration is, this book says that fathers are good. God is my father. He has good plans for me, and he loves me. He would never hurt me. He wants me to succeed. So when Charles Kennedy walked up to me one day and said, Joel, you need to go to church. I said, why? Charles, do you think I need a crutch? Really? He said, you don't understand, Joel. God is your father. I'm thinking I already had one of those. He beat me. He beat my mother. He stabbed me one day. My mother one day. He hit me with chains. He developed pornography. He was a horrible, horrible man. Why would I want to serve a God like that? And for a while, every time I read the word God here, I thought of Howard Horn. I had to change my paradigm towards God because that's what I heard when I heard Father. And by the way, don't look at me like that. You do the same thing. If you had a kind father, you think about when you say that. If you had a not so good father, you think about that. If your father left you out in the street and you had to be adopted by somebody else, you have a father that didn't care. But God's not like that. You see, that's the truth. You live with your paradigm. So you take your paradigm and you live in the world. And right here is God. The triangle is the Trinity. Where the no sign is what is the opposite of God. I don't think it's Satan. And the reason is I don't think that it's Satan is God is omnipotent. He's omnipotent. He is omniscient, omniscience. He is omnipresent. He is everywhere. And Satan isn't any of those things. Amen. He is none of those things. So all of us find a place in life where we live someplace between where God is and what Satan is trying to tempt us to do. And most of us live in the middle, or your perception of the middle. All of us know we can do something better, and we don't. All of us know we can do something worse, and we don't. You've invented a God that allows you to live where you want to live and then worship him. All of us do it. That's my thesis in life. My humble but accurate opinion. And that's not so bad. That's not so bad. But Suppose, like the Bible says, evil is going to get worse at the end times. And then you live in the middle. And then you find yourself living where you never thought you would. That's a picture of society. See, it's getting more and more evil, more and more evil, more and more evil, but we still think we're doing okay because we're living in the middle. Listen, the church is moving away from God. Do you understand that? We're moving towards society. You remember what I said to you last week? I'm committed to this sentence. You write it down. If you cross stitch it, teach it to your children, and brazen it on your chest. I don't care what you do. We have learned how to become Christians without being Christ-like. We now have turned Christianity into a social order instead of a relationship that is like Christ. And we're proud of it because we can do it very well. And when we look for somebody, we look at, are they doing these particular sins? And if they're not, they must be okay. Beth Moore, I saw her picture out there. Do you know that Crystal one time was in a seminar, and there were three teachers in this seminar, Kay Arthur, Beth Moore, and Crystal Horn. And we were sitting around the table. I'm the only man. Harold O'Chester was there, but he left. Barbara O'Chester was there. She's the one who ran that retreat ministry. So they're thinking, I'm so uncomfortable because the question goes to premarital sex. I'm thinking, don't I need to do something? Is my car need gas or something? I need to get out of here. But Beth Moore said this. When I was a kid, I would have never done premarital sex. And Kay Arthur said, why? She said, I grew up a Baptist. I was afraid I'd break out dancing. I mean, we have raised up some sins to where that's the proof of whether or not you've got a relationship with God. Am I right? And we're wrong when we do it. We've learned how to become Christians without being Christ-like. We don't think about sacrifice. We don't think about suffering anymore. It's all, how can we do it better? And that's what the problem is. So you see, if I'm right, and I'm telling you how you understand there's a God, and why do you need to understand there's a God, and why you need to know is this. There's a battle that you're in, and a battle that I'm in. I fight it every day. Look, Satan does not have the power to force me to sin. Period. The one who lives in me is omnipotent. He does not bow down to Satan. And that's why he tempts people. But the other side of the argument is this. The Holy Spirit will not force you to worship. That's why he convicts. So Joel Horn lives at the corner of both temptation and conviction. When my knowledge of God is strong and I'm living for God, it is easy to make the choices. When I'm not, it's more difficult. And let me tell you what helps me when I'm not. I know you all think I do everything right, but the fear of God. When my love for God wanes and I start making wrong decisions, the fear of God ought to come up in my life until the love of God comes back up and takes over and I serve him out of love. But we don't want to fear God. We've invented a God that we don't fear. He's just too good a guy. And that's why we don't serve him. So, I'm going to finish there. Father, my prayer is that you would, in a very, very special way, show us those things that you want us to have. Show us the things that you want to reveal to us. Show us what you would have us to be. And teach us how to have faith. And let our faith run our lives. Look at the screen quickly. I realize that some of this is hard to take at the beginning, and you're saying, I'm not sure I can do it. I don't understand it. Listen to this. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Why? Because those who come to him must believe that he is. That's at the very end of that's the last fill-ins, And I wanted to give you those so you didn't say you didn't finish. In other words, you have to believe that he is. Even though you have the arguments, and I've taught you that, you still have to believe that it is. That's your key. The others are just vehicles that you can use to develop that. So the words for to fill in are impossible and must believe. And then the last fill in is this. God cannot do things God can't do. Number one, he cannot act in a way that contradicts his nature. He cannot be not holy. He cannot be unsovereign. He cannot act in an unholy way. He cannot, or else he wouldn't be who he is. The second thing he cannot do, there's more than this, I just picked these three. He cannot act contrary to his word. If it's in his Bible, he has to do it. He doesn't lie. He cannot lie. Or else, again, he wouldn't be sovereign. He wouldn't be holy. He wouldn't be separate. And lastly, he does choose to do things. He just does to choose to do certain things. He just chooses not to do certain things that he can do. For instance, he could heal everybody. He could heal the people we prayed for instantaneously. He could have healed my first wife who died of lung cancer, and he chose not to. It wasn't about faith. We had enough faith for her to be saved, I promise. Excuse me. What he said was, she's been down there long enough. I think I'll bring her home to me. Amen. The only person mad in the whole deal was me. I was the one left. She was the reward. You understand? Death is not the punishment. Death is the reward. So there are some things, even though he can, he chooses not to do because that's his prerogative. He is big G God. At best, we are little g gods. So as you go out this week, serve the big G God who always was, always will be, and can. In my life, I always thought I would. I always thought I could. He always thought he would. It's all about him. You can live that life. You can, because you know who he is. Thanks for coming.